as a parent, I want people to have high expectations within the context of the warm and fuzzies. And you have to have both of those things, the interaction between both of those things, in order to have the best developmental outcomes for your kids.
Welcome to the Generation Youth Podcast for another exciting episode. I am James McLamb, your host. I am here today with my new friend, Andrea Mata. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. It is a great day to be alive. It's supposed to be 60 today in Northwest Ohio. February 26th, I will take that.
Well, you're a little bit warmer actually than we are in North Carolina.
What?
Or you're pretty much on track for the same thing. So that's kind of odd, because we're in the South. It's called false spring. Winter will reach back and grab us and pull us back pretty soon.
I hope not.
Well, I am really excited for our conversation today. I actually, in anticipation for the conversation that we're going to have, talk to my wife about some of these topics and community. You'll get to see why. But before we start, our audience loves to hear from our guests to introduce themselves instead of just hearing from me. So if you wouldn't mind, take a couple minutes and share your story with our Generation Youth community.
Hi, so I'm Dr. Andrea Mata. Some of my closest friends call me Dr. Dre, mostly because they cannot pronounce my name correctly. My big story, so I'm a clinical child psychologist and I specialize in the treatment of antisocial and aggressive behaviors in our youth. And how I got interested in that topic, I still remember when I was in grad school, it's my first or second year, and I told people that I really wanted to do research on antisocial and aggressive youth. And this woman, she was a much older woman, she was just auditing the class. She looks at me and she goes, "Why would you want to work with that population?" And I was like, those are my kids. Those are the kinds I love working with. And the reason because and there's a real passion that I have with them. And the reason for that was when I was 11 years old, my brother was murdered by someone who he considered a friend. And you fast forward 2 years, I'm in a courtroom and I'm sitting between my parents. And we're waiting for the judge to sentence the man who murdered my brother, what his sentence is going to be. And I remember the judge, so I'm 13, the judge is sitting there. He comes in, he sits there, he looks at my parents and me, he pauses, takes this really deep breath and goes, "I'm not going to sentence this man to death. Not because of moral or professional objections against the death penalty, but because this man had a rough life. Because this man's life was his childhood was full of a dysfunctional family. One that included psychological abuse, physical abuse, all neglect, all those kind of things. Talk about adverse childhood experiences." And so the judge was like, he had a rough life, so we're not going to give him the death penalty. And I remember sitting there flabbergasted. And I was like, what do you mean? He doesn't get the death penalty, and it's not about the death penalty, but still, what do you mean? Someone had a rough life. And so then from that moment on, I had my never again moment. Never again would someone be able to use this excuse of a rough life to kind of justify their bad choices. And so that's why I went on to study and become a clinical child psychologist, to try to help kids in those kind of situations who are coming from dysfunctional families not make as poor of choices as this guy did, all because they had a rough life. So I was a professor for 9 years. I quit. That was really, some people are like, that you quit a job you could never be fired from. I was like, yeah, but I really feel pulled to this mission. And so I started BrighSpot Families, where the mission is to fortify families and teach people individual coping skills, relationship skills, and parenting skills, which if you look kind of where's that? Over the shoulder right there is my newly released book called The Number 2 Parenting Book, Practical Tips for the Pooped Out Parent. It actually hit number 1 on Amazon for child discipline. So I was pretty excited about that. So that's me kind of in a nutshell. I'm doing my part to try to help American youth not have that excuse of a rough life to explain their bad choices.
Well, I got to say that the title of your book is really a great hook. The number two parenting book, it's just so intriguing. You want to go to it. It's like, well, why is it number two? What does that mean?
Yeah.
So I love
Most
that.
people most people think it's my second book, and then I tell them like, "No, it's my first book." And they're like, "But why is it the number 2?" I'm like, "'Cause it's practical tips in the time it takes you to poop." And they're like, "Oh, yeah."
Oh,
I'm like, "The
that
number
is even
2."
better. That's even better.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, when you and I were talking before, and we were discussing what conversation, the topic of parental burnout came up,
Mhm.
and that really lit me up because I was like, I am seeing that a lot. But for
Yeah.
our audience that may have heard that term and really doesn't understand maybe what that is, what is parental burnout?
Yeah, so I mean, ever since COVID hit, we keep hearing this term burnout, right? We hear
Hmm.
about physicians burnout, and usually the term comes out and when it comes to our careers and our work. But what parental burnout is when the expectations and the responsibilities you have as a parent outweigh your resources. So
Ooh,
then you start to feel exhausted, or you feel yourself disengaging from your children and not wanting to engage with them as much as you typically would because you just can't with all of the responsibilities and expectations that are put on parents in our society.
would you mind repeating the very first statement you said about the resources thing? Because that was
Mhm.
powerful. I love the succinctness of that definition.
So it's when your expectations and the expectations and responsibilities of being a parent outweigh your resources.
That's almost like that's a formula for me. I can
Mhm.
see that with
Yeah,
the
yeah,
you
yeah.
know the
Mhm.
the, the formula looking for that. So why does it happen? What causes this? What is
I
going
think
on?
one big thing is that our society puts a lot of pressure on parents. Like you're supposed to like do all the things for your kids and you're supposed to put them in all of these activities and you're supposed to chaperone them and you're supposed to have like these $30,000 birthday parties and you're
Yeah,
supposed to like chaperone their school trips and their field trips and oh, and by the way, you're also supposed to work like 40 to 45 hours a week and have a completely clean house and do all the laundry and this and that. And there's just so many expectations put on parents nowadays that are not actually in the best interest of one, the parents, or two, the kids. And
mm,
so, but if you look at it, it's 5.5 million Americans are struggling with parental burnout.
wow, that high? Well,
5.5.
probably that's probably underestimated. I would guess.
I
I
would
didn't mean
guess
to say
because
that
most people.
high. Now that I think
Mhm.
about it, yeah.
Yeah.
Does it lean towards more moms, or the percentage higher for moms? I mean, that's my immediate thought when you were going through some of that. What causes of it, that it kind of leaned towards moms.
Yeah, I would like I don't know exactly what the research would, but that would be my guess is that moms tend to have much more parental burnout compared to dads. Just because the expectations for women are so by our society are so high. I actually deliver this awesome workshop called Audaciously Imperfect, and it's geared towards women talking about all of these expectations that are placed on women in our society to be perfect.
Wow. You got my mind
Mhm.
going in a lot of different directions. So my mind's got to settle down on the next question.
Mhm.
So, how is someone going to know that they're really in this burnout stage versus just being tired?
Mhm.
Because I could see maybe a differentiation, during a season of life or during a time period where, hey, I'm tired, but I'm not burnt out. How can they tell the difference between what's going on?
The first thing I would say, so well, and there's assessments for it. So like you could
Oh,
Google like parental burnout assessment. I'm actually going to probably take like the leading parental burnout assessment and kind of like jazz it up a little bit because it's very academic and then like put it make it available on my website, but that's probably like a few weeks out. So there's that one. But I think like how I describe it in the book is I talk about like if you feel like you just can't, like
mm,
like that feeling, and I think it's hard to describe, but I think a lot of people know what I'm talking about, where it's like you just can't you don't want to. It's like you're usually very engaged with your kids and they're like, "Hey, let's play Monopoly." And you're like, usually like you're like, "Yes, let's play Monopoly." And then this time you're like, "Oh my God, I just can't. Like I
Mhm.
can't do that right now." And it's like you're finding yourself disengaging by like going on your phone or looking through social media or like spending more time outside of the home just because you don't want to have to deal with those expectations and responsibilities of being at home.
Well, is there a I mean, it seems like maybe there might be a next level of that moves into maybe depression or something more serious. Am I on the right track there? Because when
So I
I'm sitting there, I'm thinking there's like tiers, tired, then burnout, and then something even bigger.
Yeah, I think if you don't address the burnout, if you don't learn how to one prevent it, which is actually the best way to treat or deal with burnout, if you don't learn how to prevent it, and then if you don't know how to navigate it or cope with it or treat it once it comes in, then I think if you have it for extended times, then you're going to start to see more of like a depressive episode start to come in.
Mm.
Or some
And
people
so
might describe it as like a midlife crisis or other kind of things that might come into play.
I imagine that parental burnout has a lot of impact on someone's mental health as well. So, what are some
Mhm.
of those impact that they have? Some caution signs or something that we can give our audience so they can know, hey, I need to address this. Because I can see a lot of people wanting to be self dependent, self sufficient.
Mhm.
Hey, I can
Mhm.
handle this, but if we
Mhm.
can maybe show them if they don't address it, this is where it could go. So, what are some of those impacts?
So I think one impact is like that depression piece that comes in. Another piece that comes in, I think, is like poor or negative self-talk, where you start to believe that you are failing as a parent, or you start to question like, "Hey, should I have even become a parent?" Because you're like you have all
Mm,
this negative self-talk where it's like, "Should I have even become a parent?" Because I don't even want to spend time with my kids. And it's not that you're a terrible parent. It just means that you need one of the treatments or one of the prevention strategies of preventing parental burnout. Doesn't mean that you're a bad parent. It just means you're going through something right now and we need to kind of deal with it in an appropriate way.
So let's talk about the treatment then.
Mhm.
If they feel like they've done some self assessment, or maybe they saw someone who helped them on
Mhm.
this, what are some of the treatments that they could use to help get through this? That
Mhm.
they're getting through this? Because when we first started, the very first image that came to my mind on burnout is that movie with Michael Douglas from several years ago. I can't even remember the name of it, but when he was walk his car, it was hot July or hot day, summer day in Los Angeles, and uh, his car he gets fired from his job and he goes ballistic and he ends up shooting a lot of people and stuff. I thought it was called burnout, but it's not. But it's something similar to that. So we don't want
Okay.
them to go that extreme. Okay,
No.
so
Mm-mm. No, no.
how can we treat them so they're not Michael Douglas walking through a park, randomly
Yeah.
engaging with people? So
So if you find yourself, like I mentioned before, like if the best way to address parental burnout is to try to prevent it. And so what I
hmm
usually encourage moms and dads, all parents to do is to practice 30 minutes a day of like self-care, rejuvenation, something that you want to do. So for 30 minutes a day, you do something that you want to do where you don't have any responsibilities. So for me, it's reading a book, walking, working out. Those are like my go to kind of 30-minute activities. A lot of the time, I hear people when I tell parents this, they'll tell me, like, I don't have 30 minutes a day. And my thing is like, your family can't afford for you not to take 30 minutes a day to invest in your mental health. And so we need to get strategic, and it doesn't necessarily have to be, ideally I would like it to be 30-minute periods, but if it can be 10 minutes here, 10 minutes there, 10 minutes another part, like we need to be doing things to invest in our mental health. So that's the best way to try to prevent parental burnout. Now, if you find yourself being in a burned out state and maybe you take that assessment and then you realize, oh, like I'm burned out, like I'm in it. Like in the book, the last chapter, the last practical tip is all on parental burnout. And I kind of talk about like how I know when I'm experiencing parental burnout. How I treat that is I call it a parentcation. So either a momcation
Ooh.
or a dadcation, where for 40, and this is my ideal, for 48 hours, the parent is completely relieved of all responsibilities. And they get 48 hours to do what they want to do. They get to eat what they want to eat when they want to eat it. They get to watch what they want to watch. They get to do what they want to do. They get to sleep and nap if they want to sleep. Like they get to do whatever. And so I suggest at least once a year for like 48 hours, every parent should be relieved of all responsibilities.
Last week, my wife and I were discussing when our children were young and where we
Mhm.
were in life at that point. And the time of the year that all of our children happened to be born in was actually the busiest time for me at that point in time. I was getting
Mhm.
up early. I was coming home late. There was like a 2.5 month window. And I knew
Mhm.
this going in every year. This was going to be a time. And God said, "Hey, I'm going to stick a child being born during that time as well." Plus, one year I tore an Achilles, so I was on crutches the whole
Mm.
time during that process. And we were talking about, well, you weren't helping a lot during that time, and I was getting burned out as well. And I'm like, well, I couldn't help a lot of that time because I was coming home, and having to turn around and get up so early with this. And if we'd have
Mhm.
heard this might could have helped
Mhm.
tremendously on this.
Because if you would have known that, like, hey, for this 2.5 months, we get burned out, like, you could have then been strategic and planned 48 hours for you and then 48 hours for your wife so that, like, your like stress would have been completely depleted, right? You would have came
Wow.
in all anew, and then you guys would have been able to conquer that 2.5 months probably better than you guys going into it.
Where were you 20 years ago? Come on, Doc. I needed to hear this 20 years ago. The McLamb house needed this 20 years ago.
Think of how many families need to hear it now. I
I
can't
know.
help the
But
McLambs, but I can help now the parents.
well, one thing that I thought of when you were talking about this is, unfortunately, there's going to be parents, especially moms, I'm anticipating this,
Mhm.
that are going to
Mhm.
say, I still can't do this. And
Right.
but I have noticed that they get greater motivation when they see the effect on their child.
Mhm.
So could you elaborate on how burnout can affect the child? Because that could be a motivator to someone listening. They could say, I can still handle this. I can still go through. I'm
Mhm.
self sufficient. It's not that bad.
Mhm.
I'm just like James said, I'm tired. I'm not really burned out. But if we could show them it doesn't only
Mhm.
affect you, but maybe how it affects, well, let's just go in both directions, how it affects their
Yep.
spouse and how it
Mhm.
affects their children. That might could help someone get off the couch and, you know,
Yeah.
seek some preventive treatment.
So, the number two parenting book, the whole philosophy that leads that is what I talk about. Like, as a parent, I want people to have high expectations within the context of the warm and fuzzies. And you have to have both of those things, the interaction between both of those things, in order to have the best developmental outcomes for your kids. Now, if you are burned out, you are not parenting, you're not having those high expectations. And if you are burned out, chances are your warm and fuzzies are also going to go down. So then you start to enter into one of the other two or one of the other three parenting styles that are not associated with positive developmental outcomes. Then your child starts to show more temper tantrums. They start to show more disruptive behaviors. They are more likely to be rebellious. You're dinging your relationship with your child, which then you have to put more effort in to have a much more positive interaction. Same thing with your spouse. And so, like, if you are not taking the time to invest in yourself and giving yourself this parentcation or those 30 minutes a day, well, then it's going to have negative impacts on your child. It's dinging the relationship, and they're probably going to lead more into costly, more behavior problems. That's the word I was looking for. Now, it's interesting that you brought up single parents, because in the book, I actually address this. And I'm like, hey, for all you single parents out there, I get
Yeah.
it. And for the last 2 months in January and February, I've been working with this group of single moms. And so they each got a copy of the book. And then for the first Thursday of the first 4 months of the year, they get to meet with me and have full access to me and ask questions. And one of the biggest things that keeps coming up is that these women think that they have to do it all by themselves. And
Yeah.
we're like, stop it. You can form a community. There's other parents out there. And so in the book, I talk about the parent exchange, like parentcation exchange program. Find another parent who you like and you don't mind their kids, where you get to take 24 hours to 48 hours and take a momcation or a dadcation, and they watch your child for them. And then you also schedule a time where you take their kids and they get to have a parentcation. So then now it's like, then the kids, it's a sleepover. Kids love sleepovers,
Yeah.
and you just have to watch the kids. You have extra kind of thing, but if you're watching two kids, what's another two or three kids? Like, you just put on some movies and you buy them some pizza and you make them some popcorn, and hey, like, you give them some ice cream and you just have fun with them. You're not trying to like make them the next Albert Einstein, but then it's giving that other parent that break. And so I think if we start to rely on each other and realize that we're not in this alone, it's better off. So we've been really working on these moms, and we're like, make friends with other women in this group. And they're like, we don't trust them. And we're like, they're in the same room with you 4 times a year. Like, trust them, give them a shot, start small, build up that relationship, and the benefits will be astronomical, for not only for those moms, but for the kids too.
Well, when you were saying that, I was thinking about how this is not a new phenomenon, but the solutions are really tailored towards the culture and the world that we live in today. That 40 years ago, when people lived closer to where they grew up, where they had
Hmm.
family members that could do that.
Yeah.
Because my first thought is that when my oldest was born, if my wife wanted to have a staycation or a vacation for herself, a mom vacation, the best solution for the child may not have been
Hmm.
staying with dad as much as been staying with grandma, because grandma might have wanted that aspect of it.
Right.
So
Hmm.
that kind of leads to another thing that I thought that I was thinking about too, is there a place for mom mentors in this whole process as well? Because
Mm.
in not cultures past, but in time past, when there was more staying close to where you were born, you did have a mom mentor. It was your mom who,
Hmm.
for good or bad, was helping you or not help. They were providing input on this.
Hmm.
But now, with so many people moving and
Hmm.
being out of the area that they grew in, how, is there a role for that? How can we engage in that? I didn't see us going in this direction, but it just popped in the head. So
Yeah, I think that's an interesting concept. It's not one that I have heard a lot about. I think sometimes you fall into where my brain just went, was like mom groups, right? And like,
hmm
mom groups can be good. And I've been having this conversation with one of my clients about like surrounding like AA and like NAMI and those kind of things. And my take on that is like, in mom groups, right? I think mom groups are great if the main thing you're trying to get out of them is that support, like that sense of community. But if you are going to your mom group or your parenting group or whatever, and it's just other parents like trying to like teach you stuff, like that sometimes is not the best option, because sometimes they're not giving you practical tips or they're not giving you like research based things. So I remember there was this guy, and I won't say who his name is, but he's like an influencer on Instagram, and he was talking about marriage, and he was like, "Hey, marriages, let's talk about the 777 rule." And I was like, "What's the 777 rule?" And he was like, "Every 7 days you should go out on a date with your wife,
Oh yeah, yeah. I've heard this
with
before.
your
Yeah.
spouse. Every 7 weeks, you should do an overnight with your spouse. And every 7 months, you should take a 7-day long vacation just with your spouse." And I was like, hold up. First of all, are we talking about millionaires here? Because who can take like a date every 7 days, I can get behind. But like an overnight every 7 weeks and then a week long vacation every 7 months, like who has that kind of money? Who has that kind of childcare? And who has that kind of vacation time? Like that kind. And I'm like, it's not even research based. Like nowhere has it said like this will work. And so it's like those mom groups again are really, really good for that community, that sense of community. But I would be much more wary to kind of get actual like parenting advice and tips from those groups.
That's a great point. I've not heard it in going back to that. I've not heard it as 7 heaven. I've heard it as 222. That every
Two,
two
two, two.
weeks you do a date, every 2 months
Mm-hmm.
you go out for a night, and every 2 years you do a week away, which is
That
a
would
little
make
bit more.
much more.
Because when you
Yeah.
said every 7 months a week away, I was the same way as you. I was like, that's almost twice a year.
Right. And who's taking care? Like
Well,
people, I responded. I was like, wait. And someone was like, who's taking care of these babies? And I was like, yes,
yeah, that's exactly
for
what I was saying.
seven
I was saying every
days.
2 years,
Yeah.
that's feasible. That's very
Sure.
feasible. And every 2 months, a night away. And the
Yeah.
person that I heard explain it was like, and it doesn't have to necessarily be you go somewhere away. It's just maybe the kids are at grandma's for the night,
Right.
or
Yeah.
you guys are.
Hmm.
You go down to the hotel down, that's five
Yeah.
minutes from your house for the night. Something
Right.
that sets it
Yes.
apart. So I've heard it that regard, but the one that you said when you're 7, I was like, ooh, that is a little,
It's a little pricey. But yeah.
pricey and complicated. So,
Hmm.
so tell
Yeah.
us how our audience can engage with you and learn more about, how to combat this. Because I hope we've
Hmm.
stirred some interest. Because I know I've taken a lot of notes. I've taken 2 pages of notes,
Oh my goodness.
and yeah, I wasn't ignoring you. I was writing notes.
I didn't think
So,
that you were ignoring me.
well, the audience might think, "Oh, he's over there doodling again." So, um, but how can they engage with you to learn more about this concept? Because I can see, especially as you said, post COVID, there is just
Hmm.
such an awareness of burnout now,
Hmm.
and I don't think it's getting any easier with as you
Hmm.
said, the expectations of what we're supposed to do are rising so much. There's
Yeah.
so much, and there's so many different ways for that. I mean, we could have a whole conversation about how these
Hmm.
expectations are influenced by social media now more than they ever were just 2 decades ago. And the
Yeah.
responsibilities, as you said, are increasing because we got to take them everywhere.
Hmm.
And there's that stuff. So how can they connect with you so that they can get help?
Yeah. So I think the best way to kind of connect with me, like if you actually want to like see what kind of content I'm putting out there, is LinkedIn is probably
Yeah.
the platform where I put the most stuff out. Obviously, you can go to that Amazon and purchase the #2 parenting book. Practical Tips for the Pooped Out Parent is another way.
I love that.
An-
I really
Another
love
way
that
is
title.
if you are a company and you are interested in having me come out and delivering a workshop around parental burnout or anything parenting or relationships or individual coping skills, mental health, would love that opportunity. I actually just booked a workshop for the Audaciously Imperfect up in Michigan for September. So they're booking far out now. So that's another option. And then actually, I'm pretty excited because probably within the next month or two, I'm actually going to start offering like a 3 or 4 month, I haven't decided yet, a group parenting coaching group.
Mm.
Parenting group. So like with that, you for a monthly fee, you would get like a monthly a webinar or workshop with me. You would every week you would get a weekly group coaching call. So like parents are, again, sense of community. People can ask questions and I will answer it. So it's kind of like a mom group, but led by someone who actually has been in the trenches with parents and families for 20 years. And then every month you would get like one individual 60-minute phone call just with me. So that's going to kind of start to come out in the next month or two. So I'm pretty excited about that as well.
That is awesome. Do you do the 48 hours yourself?
I do. So I've been practicing it the
curious.
last 3 years. I've been doing
wow.
it because it's something that I recommend to a lot of my clients, not just moms, but dads too. And so usually my momcations consist of my husband will take the kids a Friday night, usually sometime like in the spring, summer, fall months. And he'll take them to our place at the lake. And then I have 48 hours to do whatever I want. And usually it's like binge watching something on Netflix, like Dead to Me season 1 and 2. I think were like my first and my second. Lincoln Lawyer on Netflix was my third one. I go for a hike. I go for a long bike ride. And this last one, I did a triathlon on Saturday morning. That was an an experience. Yeah.
I'm anticipating some people that are listening going, that's not a vacation. That's work. What are you doing?
I combined it with like other stuff. And I put it in the book, like this last momcation was not the ideal momcation because it was like, I had like sat with like a neurologist, a clinical psychologist, and a geneticist for 3 hours on Friday. And then I did the triathlon on Saturday. And then I drove back home and I was relaxing. And the rest of Saturday was good. And then like Monday, my parents called and they're like, hey, I fell. I'm going to the hospital. And so then I spent the rest of my Sunday, the rest of my momcation in the hospital helping my mom and my dad. And I'm like, this is not a momcation. I need another one.
Well, I have loved this conversation. And I'm sincere when I said, where were you 20 years ago with this? My wife would have gotten along a whole lot better and would be a whole lot better place probably now, even than we were, because we had to build on a foundation that would have propelled us to a tighter, closer relationship family wise later. So thank you for what you're doing, the information you're providing. And audience, if you are interested in any of the things that she just said, we're going to have those in the show notes. So if you are watching on YouTube, you know the drill. Look down and you'll find it. If you're listening, just go to your favorite app, favorite podcast app. It'll be in the show notes. The direct links will be there and you can connect immediately to them. So thank you again for being our guest today.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
It has been fun and a lot of good information. And audience, thank you for sticking with us. Listen, if you've stayed with us for this long, almost 35 minutes, you obviously have found some value in what you're listening to. And you know someone who needs this information. So please like and share, especially share. Share this with your community as well. But like, share, and comment on this podcast on whatever app. And we'll see you again next week on the Generation Youth Podcast.